In the early 19th century, the vast expanse of the Great Plains stood as a testament to the beauty and richness of the American landscape, a region teeming with life and cultural diversity. This era, spanning from around 1830 to 1861, marked a significant turning point in the history of the United States, as waves of settlers began to pour into the West, driven by dreams of prosperity and opportunity. However, this influx of settlers brought with it a clash of cultures that would reshape the very fabric of the plains and its indigenous peoples. As settlers arrived, they brought with them not only their hopes and ambitions, but also a worldview that was starkly different from that of the Native American tribes who had inhabited the plains for centuries. For the indigenous peoples, the land was not merely a resource to be exploited. It was a sacred space woven into the very fabric of their identity and culture. Their relationship with the land was one of stewardship, deeply connected to their spiritual beliefs, communal living, and seasonal migrations that followed the natural rhythms of the environment. In stark contrast, many settlers viewed the land as a commodity, ripe for cultivation and development, a means to an end in their quest for wealth and progress. This fundamental misunderstanding laid the groundwork for tension between settlers and indigenous peoples. The settlers' encroachment on the plains disrupted traditional ways of life, leading to conflicts over resources such as water and grazing land. As more settlers established farms and ranches, they often disregarded the established hunting grounds and migratory paths of the native tribes. The settlers, driven by their individualistic pursuits, failed to recognize the communal nature of indigenous land use and the importance of these spaces for sustaining their cultures. This clash of values and priorities fueled resentment and hostility on both sides. As settlers pushed deeper into the plains, the frequency of encounters between the two cultures increased. Initially, these interactions were often characterized by trade and cooperation. Some settlers relied on indigenous knowledge of the land, seeking guidance on hunting, foraging, and navigating the unfamiliar terrain. Conversely, many Native Americans were curious about the newcomers, intrigued by their technologies and goods. However, as the settler population grew, so too did the pressures on indigenous lands and resources, leading to a gradual erosion of trust. Misunderstandings and miscommunications became commonplace, as cultural differences obscured intentions and created a chasm of suspicion. The settlers' perception of indigenous peoples was often marred by stereotypes and misconceptions. Many settlers viewed Native Americans through a lens of romanticism or fear, painting them as either noble savages or ruthless warriors. This oversimplification stripped away the rich tapestry of indigenous cultures, reducing them to mere obstacles in the path of progress. On the other hand, indigenous peoples often saw settlers as intruders who threatened their way of life, bringing with them diseases, violence, and a disregard for the land they held sacred. This mutual misunderstanding exacerbated the tensions, leading to conflicts that would escalate over the years. As the federal government sought to manage the growing conflict between settlers and indigenous peoples, the concept of the permanent Indian frontier emerged. This policy aimed to create designated areas for Native Americans, effectively pushing them further away from their ancestral lands to make room for settlers. However, this approach was fundamentally flawed, as it failed to account for the deep connections that indigenous peoples had with their territories. The idea of a permanent frontier suggested that Native Americans could be contained and isolated, but in reality, it only intensified the struggles over land and resources. By the mid-19th century, the limitations of the permanent Indian frontier became increasingly apparent. The government's attempts to confine indigenous peoples to specific areas often led to overcrowding, resource depletion, and further conflict. The settlers' insatiable appetite for land and expansion continued unabated, leading to increased pressure on indigenous communities. In response, the U.S. government shifted its approach, leading to the establishment of the reservation system. This marked a significant transformation in the relationship between settlers and indigenous peoples, as the government sought to contain Native Americans within defined boundaries, ostensibly to protect them from encroaching settlers. The reservation system was framed as a solution to the conflicts that had arisen, but it was, in many ways, a continuation of the dispossession and marginalization of indigenous peoples. Reservations were often located in areas that were deemed undesirable or unproductive, stripping tribes of their traditional lands and resources. The government's promises of protection and support frequently fell short, leaving many indigenous communities to grapple with poverty, loss of culture, and the erosion of their social structures. Moreover, the reservation system perpetuated a cycle of dependency, as indigenous peoples were often forced to rely on government provisions and support, further undermining their autonomy and traditional ways of life. The imposition of this system reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of indigenous cultures, as it ignored their resilience, adaptability, and deep-rooted connections to the land. In conclusion, the period from 1830 to 1861 on the Great Plains was marked by a profound clash of cultures, as settlers and indigenous peoples struggled to navigate their differences amidst the pressures of expansion and change. The misunderstandings and conflicts that arose from these encounters reshaped the landscape of the plains and had lasting repercussions for both communities. The transition from the permanent Indian frontier to the reservation system illustrated the complexities of this relationship, revealing the challenges of coexistence in a rapidly changing world. Ultimately, this era serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of understanding and respecting diverse cultures, as well as the necessity of dialogue and empathy in the face of conflict. The legacy of this period continues to resonate today as we seek to learn from the past and foster a more inclusive future.